Number 2. During a lunar eclipse, the shadow of the Earth on the moon is curved.
Okay, the shadow on the moon is curved. Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, in all of his, wisdom, puts out a tweet like this, right? A lunar eclipse flat earthers have never seen. While that may be a really lame Flintstone level attempt at humor, I don't know any flat earthers who would even remotely consider that. However, interestingly enough, Iru Landucci at the Flat Earth International Conference showed a video, and I can't believe I didn't even bother to think about trying this myself, but it's one of those very simple things, taking something flat and casting a curved shadow on a sphere. Now, I don't believe that this is the way the lunar eclipse happens anyway. I just found this rather interesting considering Neil deGrasse Tyson's tweet. But let's talk about the moon. There are a lot of interesting things about the moon worth considering. The following is from a radio show I did back in 2015 talking about the issue of lunar eclipses. Now, we'll talk about the eclipses in a second, but believe it or not, many people believe that the phases of the moon are also caused by the shape and shadow of the Earth. I mean, I wish I had $1 for every time somebody called me an idiot while claiming that the phases of the moon are caused by the shape of the Earth.
Those people clearly haven't thought their argument through, especially if you go outside and see a waxing or waning a gibbous or crescent moon up in the sky at the same time the sun's out. If you think the Earth is casting the circular phase shadows on the moon, you've got a really big problem with angles, because the sun's up at the same time as the moon's up when it's a crescent moon. Clearly, that is not the shadow curvature of the Earth being depicted on the moon for the phases. The Earth is not responsible for the phases of the moon, even in the spinning heliocentric NASA, based model. It's not. They say that the phases of the moon are caused by the angles of the sun's light hitting the moon.
And I saw this short teaching video by somebody named Emily Morgan on YouTube, and I think she does a good job of explaining sort of the official view is concerning how the phases are created.
From this angle, you can see what I am seeing from Earth. We call this new moon. When it's new moon, we look up at the sky and we can't see the moon. It's there, but the side that's reflecting sunlight is away from us. Now, as I slowly make the moon orbit to my left, I can begin to see a tiny sliver of that lighted side. We call that a crescent moon. As the moon keeps orbiting, we can see more and more of that lighted side. We see half of the lighted half, which is a quarter moon. In this case, a first quarter moon. As we keep orbiting, we see almost the whole lighted side. We call that a gibbous moon. Then, when we can see the entire lighted half of the moon, that's a full moon. As the moon continues in its orbit, we begin to see less and less of that lighted side. We're back to a gibbous moon, but this time the light is on the opposite side. Then another quarter moon, last quarter moon to be exact. Another crescent, and finally back to new moon. And the cycle begins again.
Oh, great little video. And frankly, all of it makes a lot of sense until you start going outside and looking up and seeing things like this. Okay, this is at the Griffith Observatory in Hollywood. We went outside to watch the sunset, and I happened to look up and see the moon up above us. And it got me wondering. And this isn't actually the first time it happened. The first time it happened, I was actually reading Terra Firma in the pool at my apartment complex. And as I'm reading the book, it was one of those days where the sun and moon are up at the same time. And I look up at the sun, and I look at the moon right across from the sun, and the angles were totally wrong, just like they are here at the Griffith Observatory.
Okay, look at the angle of the moon.
Yeah.
Angle of the moon. Direction of the sun. Sun is way down there. Hey guys, Rob Skiba here. It's about 5 minutes to 5 p.m. January 18th. I am shooting a video of my shadow as it is being cast by the sun setting behind me. Now today's one of those days where the moon is up at the same time as the sun. I want to point something out to you. There's the moon, and we're told that the moon reflects the light of the sun. Well, if that's the case, I'm going to angle my iPhone here to the direction of the shadow. Okay, so the shadow is perpendicular to the angle that my phone is right now. See, it's about a half moon, and so you would think if the moon is reflecting the light of the sun, then the source of the light that would cast that type of shadow should be directly across from it, somewhere up here in this direction, right? Directly parallel to the light source. Should be right across from it, right? But it's not. The sun's way down here. So how is the sun way down here getting that angle of a shadow on the moon? Why isn't it doing the same thing to the moon that it's doing to me? Casting an appropriate shadow from the appropriate angle. Okay, now it's about 5:45 p.m. or so, about an hour later from the last video that I shot. See the moon going, see the sun going down in the west over there, and go this way and up, and there's the moon with the shadow angled this way. So you would think that if the moon is reflecting the light of the sun, that the sun should be shining this way. Problem is, the sun is now way down here. Look at the terminator line of the shadow. You would think the light should be coming directly across from it, but it's not. It's way down there. The angle is totally wrong for that shadow.
So, if the moon is not reflecting light as it should, could the moon actually be exactly as the scriptures say it is? You've got a number of scriptures saying that the moon is a light. It's a lesser light, according to Genesis. And in Isaiah and Ezekiel, it talks about the sun causing her light to shine or giving her light. There's nothing in Scripture that indicates that it's a reflector. And interestingly enough, there's a toy out there you can get called Moon in My Room. Here's a little review of that toy.
Today we're checking out the Uncle Milton Super Moon in My Room. And this is the moon. It's actually pretty big. To give you a size scale there, that's a piece of notebook paper, and that's our thermostat. So the moon is pretty big. It's actually a really nice size. A little bit larger than the previous Moon in My Room. And here are some of the features. First, here we go. This is the remote. So there's one large button on top, a smaller button on the bottom, and then two very small buttons on either side. So the largest button on top, when you press it once, uses the internal clock to sync up with the real moon phase. So this is the current lunar phase where we are right now. There are hanging instructions for the northern and southern hemisphere, so this way, no matter where you are, it's always in the correct orientation, which is great for budding astronomers who, will notice if it's not exactly right. So Uncle Milton's put a lot of attention to detail here. The smaller bottom button actually cycles through all of the moon's phases. So this is a manual setting, and you can use this to choose whatever phase you'd like.
A self-illuminating moon. Go figure. If Uncle Milton can figure this out, call me crazy, but I think the creator of the cosmos might just be able to do it the same way and better. Just saying. And so back to the Griffith Observatory. It's an interesting science museum, and they got all kinds of displays there, and for the most part, the displays show how things are believed to work. And so you would think, for the display on lunar phases, that you would see a moon going around the Earth with a light source pretending to be the sun. I mean, they have a display of the Earth going around the sun where they have a light source representing the sun shining on the Earth and showing the Earth in rotation and going through the various seasons. So it's not like they didn't have the ability to do it with the rotating Earth and everything. So you would think you'd have a rotating moon that is, quote, tidal locked to the Earth such that the same face is always pointing toward the Earth. And as it's rotating around the Earth with the same face always pointing toward the Earth, see how the phases work. I mean, you would think that they would have a display like that, but they didn't. What did they have? They had a self-illuminating moon going around in a circle, creating the moon phases. And it wasn't a whole lot different than an animation I created really early on. Again, this back in like 2015, I was trying to figure out, well, how could the moon self-illuminate and create phases? And I created a ball like this. I imagined it would have like a light source on one side and dark on the other. I had this, just rotating ball with a white side and a black side, and then all I did was just superimpose a graphic of the moon on top of it, and what do you know? I've got moon phases. A self-illuminated moon with moon phases. Now, granted, there are issues with the shadows of the craters that I haven't figured out that certainly do fit the model of reflectivity from the sun, but I'm having a hard time with that whole reflector thing, especially when you realize that anytime you have a reflector, it's going to bounce back the same light that is shined on it. And we've found that that is not the case, that the moon, not only does the scriptures and a lot of other texts describe the moon as giving off her own light, but it gives off a totally different light. The sun gives off warm light or hot light, and the moon gives off a cold light. I met this guy out in Lubbock, and he was the first to show me this in a practical example.
Hello, my name is Jerry Rogers, and I'm in a little podunk town north of here called Shallowater, and we're going to do a moonlight test. And the moonlight currently in the shade, I'm going to get a recording of somewhere around 40 degrees. And then we go over here to the moonlight full on, and we've got 32.5, 33, somewhere right in that area. And you can go right back over here around to 40.
Now, would that be because we're looking at incandescent light coming down right here, or could
If
do
you
it in
want
a
to
shot?
go over there, I don't care.
So it's the same either way.
It's either way. Apparently the moon don't seem to matter.
Okay.
Just
so
as long as you can get the
there's a
moonlight
shadow like right here?
itself and the shade of the moon.
So that's the shade. In the shade, it's 39 degrees.
And then you go to the moonlight, and you got 32.
32.
Wow.
Mm.
Or 33, 32, 33.
Is it more dramatic when it gets darker?
It seems to be more dramatic when the moon is fullest.
So the moon, like on a full moon,
Like the fullest
in a completely
moon,
dark
I'm getting
night.
sometimes 12 degrees.
12 degrees. So
Yeah.
the more full the moon is, the cooler it is.
It seems to be.
It's a half moon right now.
Don't ask me why, because I don't know. But I know it works every time I've tried it, everywhere I've tried it. Don't matter if I'm at the ranch or at Shallowater. Went over to my 85-year-old uncle's house and did it in his front yard, and he made me go buy him one.
Okay, so it's a nice sunny day here in Dallas, Texas. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. A couple days ago, I got this pretty cool gizmo in the mail. I ordered this Centec infrared thermometer. Basically, you just pull the trigger and point it at something, and it will tell you the temperature in Celsius and Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on, switch it from Celsius to Fahrenheit, pull the trigger, and test the sunlight in the parking lot here. And it looks like it's 48.5. So now that's in direct sunlight. I'm going to go over here to the shadow of this bush and try it again. and 28.4. So it's about 20 degrees colder here in the shade of this bush than it is in the direct sunlight. Now I'm going to give this another test next time it's a full moon. I'm not sure when the next full moon is, but I've been told that it's pretty much the direct opposite when you measure shadows of moonlight and direct moonlight. So we shall see.
It took a while for me to find a good night with a full moon that wasn't either overcast or too late at night when I wasn't going to be around, or if I was traveling, what have you. At any rate, about 6 months later, I finally found the perfect night with a full moon and went out and did the test. Now, I'd done the test a few other times in different phases, but this is the first time doing it with a full moon.
Okay, we're going to try this again. We got a full moon out tonight, so I got my whiteboard and my laser thermometer. Nice full moon out tonight on the other side of this hotel here, as seen from the parking garage of my office complex. So I'm going to set up my whiteboard just like I did before, with it facing toward the direct moonlight. And I'll get my iPhone here to focus up on my thermometer. Okay, let's do a test here. And it's 80.9 degrees in direct moonlight, and shooting underneath here, it's 89.6 degrees in the full moon light. There you go. It's colder in the direct moonlight than it is in the shadow. Try it one more time. Switch to Fahrenheit. 80.6. Shooting underneath. $89.6.
So 9 whole degrees different. All I did is take a foam core, trifold thing you can get at Walmart, and set it up, reflecting the light of the moon. You saw me do it live. I just showed you exactly what I did. No smoke and mirrors, nothing. Just that's what I did, and it showed 80.9 degrees in the direct moonlight and 89.6 degrees right underneath it. 9 degrees difference. It was 9 degrees warmer in the shade of the moon than it was in direct moonlight. That's a totally different kind of light. The light of the sun brings life to living organisms and stuff, and there's documentation about how the light of the moon does the exact opposite. It aids in decay. It's a totally different light. All right, so now that we've established that, let's get to the topic of lunar eclipses. And I'll go back to a video that I did back in 2015.
So, if the phases of the moon are not caused by the shadow of the Earth, what about the lunar eclipse? Now, that one everybody seems to understand to be the result of the moon going into the Earth's shadow, as depicted here. You have the Earth's penumbra and the Earth's umbra. And as the moon starts to go into the umbra side of it, that's where somehow the dark shadow of the Earth makes the moon turn red. Like, that even makes sense. But that's what we're taught. That's what all the charts and everything show. But is that really the case? Well, let's see. This author points out some really interesting things regarding lunar eclipses and solar eclipses as well. It says, beginning on page 101, causes of solar and lunar eclipses. A solar eclipse is a result simply of the moon passing between the sun and the observer on Earth. But that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the Earth is a statement in every respect, because unproved, unsatisfactory. The Earth has been proved to be without orbital or axial motion, and therefore it could never come between the sun and the moon. The Earth is also proved to be a plane, always underneath the sun and moon, and therefore to speak of its intercepting the light of the sun and thus casting its own shadow on the moon is to say that which is physically impossible. And this also gets into the whole issue of self-illumination. And we've talked about that in previous shows, but the ancient texts do not in any way support the idea that the moon is receiving her light from the sun. It says that she's giving or causing her own light. So the phases are internal, not external. Dr. Robotham goes on to say, besides the above difficulties or incompatibilities, many cases are on record of the sun and moon being eclipsed when both were above the horizon. That's a big problem. The sun, the earth, and the moon not in a straight line, but the earth below the sun and moon, out of the reach or direction of both, and yet a lunar eclipse has occurred. Is it possible that a shadow of the earth could be thrown upon the moon when sun, earth, and moon were not in the same line? The difficulty has been met by assuming the influence of refraction, as in the following quotations. And he's citing somebody here. It says, on some occasions, the horizontal refraction amounts to 36 or 37 minutes, and generally to about 33 minutes, which is equal to the diameter of the sun or moon, and therefore the whole disk of the sun or moon will appear above the horizon, both at rising and setting, although actually below. This is the reason that the full moon has sometimes been seen above the horizon before the sun was set. A remarkable instance of this kind was observed at Paris on the 19th of July, 1750, when the moon appeared visibly eclipsed, while the sun was distinctly to be seen above the horizon. That's a quote from Astronomy and Astronomical Instruments by George G. Gary. Another quote here. On the 20th of July, 1837, the moon appeared to rise eclipsed before the sun had set. The same phenomenon was observed on the 20th of September, 1717. That's from McCulloch's Geography, page 85. Let's see, he's got another one here. In the lunar eclipses of July 17th, 1590, November 3rd, 1648, June 16th, 1666, and May 26, 1668, the moon rose eclipsed, whilst the sun was still apparently above the horizon. Those horizontal eclipses were noticed as early as the time of Pliny. That's according to the Illustrated London Almanac for 1864, the astronomical articles in which are by James Glaisher, ESQ of the Greenwich Royal Observatory, page 99. Another citation. On the 17th of January, 1870, a similar phenomena occurred, and again in July of the same year. That's the reference there is the Daily Telegraph, July 16th, 1870. The only explanation which has been given of this phenomenon is the refraction caused by the Earth's atmosphere. This at first sight is a plausible and fairly satisfactory solution, but on carefully examining the subject, it is found to be utterly inadequate. And those who have recourse to it cannot be aware that the refraction of an object and that of a shadow are in opposite directions. An object by refraction is bent upwards, but the shadow of any object is bent downwards, as will be seen by the following very simple experiment. Take a plain white shallow basin and place it 10 or 12 inches from a light in such a position that the shadow of the edge of the basin touches the center of the bottom. Hold a rod vertically over and on the edge of the shadow to denote its true position. Now let water be gradually poured into the basin, and the shadow will be seen to recede or shorten inwards and downwards. But if a rod or a spoon is allowed to rest, with its upper end towards the light and the lower end in the bottom of the vessel, it will be seen as the water is poured in to bend upwards, thus proving that if refraction operated at all, it would do so by elevating the moon above its true position and throwing the Earth's shadow downwards or directly away from the moon's surface. Hence it is clear that a lunar eclipse by a shadow of the Earth is an utter impossibility. The moon's entire surface, or that portion of it which is presented to the Earth, has also been distinctly seen during the whole time of a total lunar eclipse. This is entirely incompatible with the doctrine that an eclipse of the moon is the result of a shadow of the Earth passing over its surface. Mr. Walker, who observed the lunar eclipse on March 19, 1848, near Collumpton, says, "The appearances were as usual till 20 minutes past 9. At that period, and for the space of the next hour, instead of an eclipse, or the shadow umbra of the Earth being the cause of the total obscurity of the moon, the whole face of that body became very quickly and most beautifully illuminated, and assumed the appearance of the glowing heat of fire from the furnace, rather tinged with a deep red, the whole disk of the moon being as perfect with light as if there had been no eclipse whatever. The moon positively gave good light from its disk during the total eclipse." That's from Philosophical Magazine number 220 from August 1848. The following case, although not exactly similar to the last, is worth recording here as showing that some other cause existed than the Earth's shadow to produce a lunar eclipse. He cites somebody here saying, "Extraordinary phenomena attending the eclipse. On Saturday evening, February 27th, 1858, at Brussels, the eclipse was seen by several English philosophers who happened to be present. It was attended by a very remarkable appearance, which Dr. Foster said was wholly inexplicable on any laws of natural philosophy with which he was acquainted. The moment before contact, a small dusky spot appeared on the moon's surface, and during the whole of the eclipse, a reddish-brown fringe, or penumbra, projected above the shadow of the Earth. Another thing still more remarkable was the apparent irregularity of the edge of the shadow. 3 persons, one of them an astronomer, were witnesses of these curious phenomena, which no law of refraction can in any way explain." That's a quote from Morning Star of Wednesday, March 3rd, 1858. The author continues, "The several cases above advanced are logically destructive of the notion that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the Earth. As before stated, the Earth is proved to be a plane without motion and always several hundred miles below the sun and moon, and cannot, by any known possibility, come between them. It cannot therefore intercept the light of the sun and throw its own shadow upon the moon. If such a thing were a natural possibility, how could the moon continue to shine during the whole or any considerable part of the period of its passage through the dark shadow of the Earth? Refraction, or what has been called earth light, will not aid in the explanation, because the light of the moon is at such times like the glowing heat of fire tinged with deep red. Reddish is not the word to express it. It was red hot. The reddish light made it seem to be on fire. It looked like a fire smoldering in its ashes. Its tint was that of red-hot copper." Those were all quotes. "The sunlight is of an entirely different color to that of the eclipsed moon, and it is contrary to known optical principles to say that light, when refracted or reflected, or both simultaneously, is thereby changed in color. If a light of a given color is seen through a great depth of comparatively dense medium, as the sun is often seen in winter through the fog or vapor of the atmosphere, it appears of a different color, and generally of such as that which the moon so often gives during a total eclipse. But a shadow cannot produce any such effect, as it is in fact not an entity at all, but simply the absence of light. From the facts and phenomena already advanced, we cannot draw any other conclusion than that the moon is obscured by some kind of semi-transparent body passing before it, and through which the luminous surface is visible. The luminosity changed in color by the density of the intervening object. This conclusion is forced upon us by the evidence, but it involves the admission that the moon shines with light of its own, that it is not a reflector of the sun's light, but absolutely self-luminous. Although this admission is logically compulsory, it will be useful and strictly zetetic to collect all the evidence possible which bears upon it. First, a reflector is a plane or concave surface which gives off or returns what it receives. If a piece of red-hot metal or any other heated object is placed before a plane or concave surface, heat is reflected. If snow or ice or any artificial freezing mixture is similarly placed, cold will be reflected. If light of any given color is placed in the same way, the same color of light will be reflected. If a given sound is produced, the same tone or pitch will be reflected. A reflector will not throw off cold when heat is placed before it, nor heat when cold is presented. If a red light is received, red light will be returned, not blue or yellow. If the note C is sounded upon any musical instrument, a reflector will not return the note D or G, but precisely the same note when altered only in degree and intensity. If the moon is a reflector of the sun's light, she could not radiate or throw down upon the earth any other light than such as she first receives from the sun. No difference could exist in the quality of character of the light, and it could not possibly differ in any other respect than that of intensity or quantity. It has been asserted in opposition to the above that the moon might absorb some of the rays of light from the sun and reflect only the remaining rays. To this, it is replied that absorption means speedy saturation. A piece of blotted paper, or a lump of hard sugar, or a sponge, when brought into contact with any fluid or gaseous substance, would only absorb for a short time. It would quickly become saturated, filled to repletion, and from that moment would cease to absorb, and ever afterwards could only reflect or throw back whatever was projected upon it. So the moon, if an object without light of her own, might at the beginning of her existence absorb the sun's rays, and fixing some might return the others, but as already shown, she could only absorb to saturation, which would occur in a very short time, and from this point of saturation to the present moment, she could only have been other than a reflector too, of all which she receives. We have then, in order to know whether the moon is a reflector, merely to ascertain whether the light which we receive from her is or is not the same in character as that received from the sun. And due to the lack of time we have left in this broadcast, I'm not going to continue, probably to your great joy and my terrible reading of this. But this author goes on to describe the many differences in the type of light that comes from the sun and the type of light that comes from the moon. And as I said earlier, this author is quite thorough in his explanations and experiments. And he goes on to describe various ancient cultures that talk about a dark object that is also part of our solar system. Skipping ahead here, page 114, talking about the moon being self-illuminating. We have seen that during a lunar eclipse, the moon's self-luminous surface is covered by a semi-transparent something, that this something is a definite mass because it has a distinct and circular outline, is seen during its first and last contact with the moon. As a solar eclipse occurs from the moon passing before the sun, so from the evidence above collected, it is evident that a lunar eclipse arises from a similar cause. A body, semi-transparent and well-defined, passes before the moon, or between the moon's surface and the observer on the surface of the earth. That many such bodies exist in the firmament is almost a matter of certainty, and that one such as that which eclipses the moon exists at no great distance above the surface is a matter admitted by many of the leading astronomers of the day, that being the late 1800s. In the report of the Council of the Royal Astronomical Society for June 1850, it is said, quote, "We may well doubt whether that body which we call the moon is the only satellite of the earth," end quote. In the report of the Academy of Sciences of October 12, 1846, and again for August 1847, the director of one of the French observatories gives a number of observations and calculations which have led him to conclude that, quote, there is at least one non-luminous body of considerable magnitude which is attached as a satellite to this Earth, end quote. Sir John Herschel admits that, quote, invisible moons exist in the firmament, end quote. That's from Herschel's Astronomy, page 521 and 616. Sir John Lubbock is of the same opinion and gives rules and formula for calculating their distances, periods, etc. At the meeting of the British Association of the Advancement of Science in 1850, the president stated that, quote, the opinion was gaining ground that many of the fixed stars were accompanied by companions emitting no light, end quote. Quote, the changeable stars which disappear for a time or are eclipsed have been supposed to have very large opaque bodies revolving about or near to them so as to obscure them when they come in conjunction with us, end quote. That's from the Encyclopedia Londinensis. Fixed stars as the category. Another quote here. Bessel, the greatest astronomer of our time, in a letter to myself in July 1844 said, I do indeed continue in the belief that Procyon and Sirius are both true double stars, each consisting of one visible and one invisible star. A laborious inquiry just completed by Peters at Königsberg and a similar one by Schubert, the calculator employed on the North American Nautical Almanac, support Bessel. That's from a work called Physical Description of the Heavens by Humboldt, page 183, copyright 1867. Another quote. The belief in the existence of non-luminous stars was prevalent in Grecian antiquity and especially in the early times of Christianity. It was assumed that among the fiery stars which are nourished by vapors, there move other earthly bodies which remain invisible to us. That's from Origin. Another one by Diogenes of Apollonica. Stars that are invisible and consequently have no name move in space together with those that are visible. Lambert, in his cosmological letters, admits the existence of, quote, dark cosmological bodies of great size. Now, if all this is true, this may solve the problem of what do we do with things like this Planet X Nibiru thing, which even in the spinning heliocentric globe model is reckoned to be a dark planetary body. So, and of course, scientists are all talking about dark matter and everything today, even in that standard model. So if people can talk about dark bodies in the spinning heliocentric globe expanding universe model, then why couldn't we apply the same thing to the flat Earth enclosed model? What if there are dark bodies within the dome? Robotham continues. We have now seen that the existence of dark bodies revolving about the luminous objects in the firmament has been admitted by practical observers from the earliest ages, and that in our own day, such a mass of evidence has accumulated on the subject that astronomers are compelled to admit that not only dark bodies, which occasionally obscure the luminous stars when in conjunction, but that cosmological bodies of large size exist, and that, quote, one at least is attached as a satellite to this Earth, end quote. It is this dark or, quote, non-luminous satellite, end quote, which when in conjunction or in line with the moon and an observer on Earth is the immediate cause of a lunar eclipse. That's page 116 of Zetetic Astronomy by Dr. Samuel Robotham. And actually, as I continued to search this out, I found some interesting things within the Hindu religion. Now, look, I'm not going to say I'm going to put any authority on Hindu scriptures over biblical scriptures. I'm not taking my doctrine from the Hindus. But, you know, I think if we're going to be true Zetetic explorers or people who are on a genuine quest for truth, doing investigation by observation and inquiry, then we have to look at the available evidence. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us how eclipses are caused, so we don't get any information, you know, at least not that I'm aware of. Somebody's free to message me and tell me otherwise, but as far as I know, the Bible doesn't tell you how a solar or lunar eclipse takes place, like the mechanics of it, how it happens. So, and if these astronomers, at least from the 1800s and from antiquity, are admitting that there are dark objects in the sky, then we would expect it to show up in the literature of other people around the world. And indeed we do. The Hindus have these interesting characters called Rahu and Ketu in their mythology. And I got this website here when I looked it up. Let us now take a closer look at the mythical origin of the dark demon Rahu. In old Indian tales, Rahu storms across the heavens in a dark chariot drawn by 8 black horses as swift as thought itself. He pursues the orbs of sun and moon, snapping at their heels with his huge jaws. In another version of the myth, however, only Rahu's head still exists, floating above the firmament, having been severed by Indra, the sun god, as the dark demon tried to steal the vital drink of the gods. Nonetheless, this decapitation did not hinder him from continuing to fly through the heavens and swallowing the sun and moon. It is just that these now passed through him unharmed and soon reappeared, freed from the lower end of his throat. In astronomical terms, this process signifies the end of the solar or lunar eclipse, respectively. So basically, they have this idea of this floating head of a god out there that tries to swallow up the sun and moon, but obviously, because it's decapitated, the sun and moon just exit the other side. So that would give the illusion that we see in the sky from a mythological perspective of this rounded object coming up on the moon, and then the moon going through it and then coming out the other end. So you can kind of see where they get that idea from. And you can look them up on Wikipedia or elsewhere online. This is Rahu right here and Ketu right here. So if nothing else, here's some things to think about, okay? Again, I'm just exploring this stuff. I'm trying to put pieces together, see what could be, what might be other ways to look at things that we've been taught our whole life. But I just want to say that the issue of the lunar eclipse is sort of falling apart as it pertains to being a solid argument that would keep me tied to the globe model. In other words, I'm finding evidence both scientifically, at least from the 1800s, people writing in various scientific journals, as well as historical accounts of the ancients talking about a dark body that could be responsible for causing the moon to go into lunar eclipse. And frankly, the whole idea of the moon going into a blood red lunar eclipse while the sun is still up, in my mind, obliterates the whole idea that the lunar eclipse is due to the sun, earth, and moon being in a line and the moon in the shadow of the earth. It doesn't work.
And I covered similar ground on a show that Patricia Steer did with me. She interviewed me back in December of 2015. And this is when I was still very much questioning everything and hadn't committed to anything. I was just asking a lot of questions. And at that time, I had 2 major issues, as I said before, the Coriolis effect and the lunar eclipse. Those were 2 big ones holding me back at that time.
When I read of numerous accounts that this guy documents and footnotes and everything, I haven't gone and personally dug up the archives, and I haven't had time to do anything like that. But he gives, at least in his time, documented, annotated, footnoted accounts of people seeing the blood red moon lunar eclipse taking place while the sun was still up. Well, I mean, the model that we're all told is the only way that works is if the earth is here and the sun is here and the moon is here in the cone-shaped, umbra shadow of the earth, that's the only way you get the blood moon is over here. But yet if the moon's turning into an eclipse and the sun's still up and you're on the earth and you can see both, something else must be causing the eclipse. So, and then when I looked at that, I saw that many ancient cultures believed that there were other dark orbs or dark objects or invisible objects that were also part of our system. And the Hindu version of it was particularly interesting to me. Rahu and Ketu were the 2 entities that they named as the ones that basically were responsible for, they were decapitated heads, interesting, I used that earlier, that would try to swallow up the moon. But because it's a decapitated head, when this spherical moon object came up on the moon, That's the illusion that we see of it turning red, and the moon just kind of goes out the neck of the decapitated head. That's, this is the mythology develops because the people had a certain mindset and they were trying to explain things. This shows that the Hindus had the same mindset of an enclosed world within which the sun and moon were inside a dome, and they were trying to understand, well, what is that thing covering up the moon, and what is that covering up the sun? And I still think the moon is responsible for the solar eclipse, the moon coming in conjunction with the sun. But as far as the lunar eclipse, it can't be the way we're told in modern science if it's happening while the sun is still up. So I tend to believe, hey, why not? In heliocentric, spinning globe, monkey man science, they're all talking about dark matter anyway. So dark matter is like the buzzword phrase these days. And you got others talking about Nibiru and Planet X as a dark planet, supposedly going through our solar system. So why not? If you can embrace that in the spinning heliocentric globe model, why can't you accept it in the possible, enclosed world model? Like I said, I'm a zetetic agnostic right now. I'm looking at all the possibilities, looking at the available evidence and trying to weigh it with reality and see what makes the most sense. Today is Monday, September 28th, about 7:15, and you can see that's about the time the sun sets around here, about 7:15 or so. Sun's setting out there in the west. Let's go ahead and punch up my compass app, and let's see here. There's the sun going down in the west. The moon came up in the east, just up above that little covered stairwell over there, and it was right about there at roughly 9:11 p.m. Central Standard Time. And the direction we are looking there is about 100 degrees or so. Let's see. Yeah, about 100 degrees east. It's where the moon popped up. The only problem is the sun had just set about an hour and 45 minutes earlier right behind us, and yet the shadow was coming from this direction, which is north. How did the shadow from the Earth being cast by the sun, which set in the west, end up coming from the north? It is now 8:15, Monday, September 28th. So about an hour ago, the sun went down right over there, and directly behind me now, the moon is popping up. Like I said, just kind of right above the covered stairwell over there. Yesterday was actually a little bit further to the right. So there's the moon about an hour later. 2 hours later, last night, it was higher than it is right now, of course. And the shadow was coming from the north, which is where the building is, right there to the left. Sun went down in the west, right behind us. Shadow of the Earth came from the north. We are looking at the compass pointing north. That is north. Here's the buildings. There's the moon. That's west. That's north. That's east. The shadow, allegedly, of the Earth appeared on the left side of the moon, which is the side facing north. So if the sun went down behind us in the west, you would think the shadow would have been on the bottom of the moon instead of the left side of the moon.
So from a perspective point of view, that doesn't make any sense at all. And something else that never made any sense to me is we're told that the moon controls the tides. Well, okay, so think this through. You're telling me
that there's this object out there that's like 1/4 the size of the Earth or something like that, with 1/6 the gravity, and it's over 250,000 miles away, 30 Earth diameters. You can put 30 Earths between us and the moon. In fact, I've even heard it said that you could take all of the planets in the so-called solar system and fit them between the Earth and the moon. That's how far away the moon is supposed to be away from us. How come the Earth, that's supposed to be so much bigger and have so much more mass and gravity, how come the Earth's not pulling the moon into it? But no, we're told the moon, with 1/6 the gravity, 1/4 the size of the Earth, is tugging on the oceans? What does water weigh? 1 gallon of water weighs about 8 pounds. 1 gallon. How many gallons of water do you think are in the oceans? That's really heavy. Last time I looked it up, I think the total amount of water on the Earth is something like 332.5 million cubic miles of water, 96% of which is salt water, like the oceans. That's a lot of water. That's a lot of weight. And this dinky little object, 30 Earth diameters away, over 250,000 miles away, 1/4 the size, 1/6 the gravity, is pulling all that weight, and yet my 180-pound frame doesn't get thrown off into space? Really? And it doesn't affect pools? It doesn't affect lakes? Something else is causing the tide. I don't believe it's the moon. But these are the things that we're taught, so these are the things that we parrot. But when you start thinking about these things, you're like, well, that doesn't make sense. And then this one right here is really interesting to me. I have a friend who was in nuclear physics in the Navy, so a smart guy. He became a flat earther. His brother is an airline pilot, I believe, and my friend lives in Washington State, and his brother lives in Colorado. And they had this app, and you can download it, $6 for your iPhone. It's called Theodolite. You could download that app, and it's something surveyors would use to check angles and distances and things like that. So Theodolite is the name of it. And so he and his brother, it was one of these days where the moon was out at the same time, or out at the same time as the sun during the day. And they said, okay, they're on the phone with each other. On the count of three, we'll both take a picture of the moon in the center of the crosshairs of the theodolite. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, click. They both clicked, got a picture of the moon, and the theodolite software gave them a whole bunch of data on angles and stuff like that. Now, how many of you know, if you know the distances between 2 points, you can triangulate to figure out the third, right? So they went to this website, calculator.net, it's just a math website, and they wanted to do the triangulation on the moon. So they took all the data from the theodolite app, plugged it in, hit go, whatever, and it told them that the moon was less than 300 miles away. So they said, well, okay, let's try that a few times. Science is testable, observable, repeatable, right? So let's do the test a few more times. So they did a few more times. He had another test with a buddy that lived in Houston. They did the same thing. So they're like, wow, I mean, look at the answers this is coming up with. So they took it to a university, and they brought it to some of these professors, and they said, hey, what do you think of this app? They analyzed it. Wow, this is a great app. It's going to be a useful tool for, surveyors and whatnot. Awesome, cool. What do you think about the website calculator.net? Oh, that's a great website. Everybody uses that. It's a really good math website. Okay, so this software that you just endorsed and the website that you just endorsed just said that the moon is less than 300 miles away. All of a sudden you hear that sound effect. Remember the Flintstones? That's the sound that you hear when the gerbil jumps off the wheel. I can't, wow, there's got to be a problem. So if you can go out and do tests for yourself that show and mathematically can be confirmed that the moon is way closer than over 250,000 miles away, and if you can observe an eclipse taking place where the shadow is moving in a direction that is 90 degrees off from where it should be starting, and of course if you can prove that the Earth is actually flat, then it seems to me that the whole idea of the Earth causing the lunar eclipse has to go out the window.
And once again, I know this is not going to convince anybody who doesn't want to be convinced. Anybody who believes in the standard model is going to continue to believe it, and they're going to continue to think I'm an idiot and give all the reasons why. That's fine. For the rest of you, all I could say is this is the journey that I've been on, and looking at the various pieces of evidence and doing tests for myself, it doesn't look to me like this thing really is a reflector. It's certainly not acting like one. The angles are all wrong, and there are plenty of websites you can go to, and they'll try to give some kind of refraction explanation for why that is. But okay, take it or leave it. It didn't work for me. When I looked at that, it didn't make any sense to me that the light is coming from totally different directions, that the terminator line is not where it should be if the sun is the source of the light. And interestingly enough, even Stellarium showed the same thing. If you remember the video that I showed concerning time zones and how I was using Stellarium to try to figure out how time zones work, and how the 24-hour sun and 4 seasons and all that. Well, I mean, just looking at this right here, even Stellarium showed the terminator line of the moon at the wrong angle for the light source. And as we've just seen, it's not acting like a reflector. It's not throwing off the same light as the sun. It's throwing off completely different light that acts totally different. That's actually warmer in the shade than it is in the light. Totally opposite the sun, where it's warmer in the light than it is in the shade. So, all these things considered, and of course the biblical account describing the moon as a light unto itself, and you have other people saying that there are dark objects out there in the cosmos, then it seems to me that there are other plausible explanations for the lunar eclipse. And therefore, number 2 just isn't really, for me, a strong case for the globe.